Okay, so it's time to move on to the third talk of the day. So our next speaker is Dr. Dave Pugmire. Dave is from the Oak Ridge National Lab in the States, where he's a senior staff scientist, and he's going to talk to us today about scientific visualization as a service. Over to you, Dave.
Great, thanks, Graham. Let's see. Share. Okay, all right. This all good still?
Yep.
Okay. Let's see. There we go. Okay, there we go.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So thank you, Graham, for the introduction and for the invitation to speak at the workshop. It's a delight to be here and get to know folks and what they're doing. So, as he said, I'm at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which is one of the Department of Energy open science laboratories that's located in the southeastern Tennessee, right within the Great Smoky Mountains. And the two major focuses of the lab are computation, and there's also the very large spallation neutron source, which is located on campus as well. As far as exascale computing, me and the collaborators on this talk are part of a number of different ones. We're funded by the VTKM, Alpine, and ExaLearn. VTKM and Alpine are both visualization, and ExaLearn is an AI ECP project. And we collaborate with a lot of other projects. ADIOS, which you heard about yesterday, WDMAP is a fusion. CODAR is data reduction, and then WarpX and ExaWind are applications as well. Also part of the SIDAC Institute, which is another DOE-funded program for doing science at scale on supercomputers. So just a quick intro. So, SciViz, the point is to create images that convey information about what's going on inside of the data or a process that we're trying to understand. And so, visualizations so the purpose is to transform data so that it can be used by the visual processing system of the brain, which makes up a huge fraction of the brain, so that we can understand what's going on. And, I like to think of it as the 3 R's: the right data to the right scientist in the right way. So there are a number of different ways to think about visualization. SciViz, you usually have a mesh, you've got some spatiotemporal discretization. Information viz, where the data are more abstract. And one of the challenges is to impose a spatiotemporal discretization onto it so that so that it can be easily visualized. And then visual analytics, which is sort of a human in the loop and guided by AI and whatnot. So into the topic of the talk. So visualization has always been really hard, but in the past, the process for doing visualization was fairly straightforward. It had a low barrier to entry. That the data was on disk and it was easy to share. All of the people involved could get access to the data, and there were a large number of tools that could read these that could read this data from disk, because they were stored in common file formats. However, now the process of doing visualization is becoming a big challenge. As Dave mentioned, it was discussed earlier, you can't save all the data to disk, and so streaming and reduced representations are required. Also, the hardware is becoming much more complex. There's heterogeneous computing with deep memory hierarchies, and data often needs to be moved. Another challenge is that scientists are going towards automated workflows where a large number of processes are orchestrated, and so the viz and the analysis needs to be more tightly integrated into the scientific process. And at present, a lot of the in situ efforts tend to be one-off solutions that are brittle, that are brittle and difficult to generalize. And so this is an active area of research of trying to come up with more general, less brittle solutions. And so, which led us to believe that, you know, since there's this difficulty here, that maybe we need to re-examine some of the underlying assumptions. And so I'm going to start with a motivating example. This is a workflow from a recent Fusion collaboration we had. So there's these two codes that are being coupled, this gene code and XGC, which the gene code computes the core and XGC computes the edge region, because the physics in there are very different. And so while this is running, there's a number of different things that the scientists want to see. So they want to see some 1D plots. They want to see some 2D, you know, some specific images of the core, you know, other analysis quantities about the edge, and then the coupled physics together, showing both the edge and the core all in one. And so this becomes quite complicated. And so what we've been thinking is the move away from this and go and start looking at service-oriented architectures, or this software as a service. And so when we think of visualization of a service, it utilizes several SOA aspects. Infrastructure as a service, you've got to get the right amount of, you got to right size the resources for what you're doing. Software as a service, where you have abstractions for data access and execution environments. And then the idea of microservices, where you can chain small services together in arbitrary ways to accomplish what the scientist wants to do in the workflow. And so we recently published a paper outlining some of the abstractions that are needed to make this paradigm work. And so the first here are the basic, you know, what you have to do to just get it to work. And so the first one is data access. You know, in these new environments, data could come from anywhere. It could come from disk, deep within the memory hierarchy, over the wide area network, from different nodes in the system. And so there needs to be a way to get access to the data, get a hold of the data. And then surface composition, you know, how do you connect these microservices? How do these microservices know how, you know, understand what data they're being given and know how to operate on it? And then the data interpretation is, how do you map that, you know, the underlying data stream onto a data model that a visualization application can actually understand and use? And then the higher level tier is looking at flexibility and user engagement. And so, you know, portable performance, we've got these heterogeneous nodes, and Viz could be scheduled on any one of those. And you might have you might have a GPU, maybe you only have 8 cores. And so the services need to be able to run, you know, portably across a variety of resources. Dave alluded to this earlier, but there's different modes of running in situ Viz. And knowing how to run a service and where to run a service can have, you know, is not clear at all. And so understanding where these need to put in the workflow, how, you know, what resources they need, is an important thing. And then finally, a declarative, where it's a, you know, so that we can separate what the scientist wants to do from the particular algorithm that should be run. So the scientist might say, you know, I want isosurfaces of this feature, and, you know, maybe you've got, you know, a uniform grid, and so you want to use a faster algorithm on that versus a more general purpose. So separating these details. And so if we return back to this motivating workflow, you can see how the data access, the interpretation, and the composition abstractions fit into this. And then there's also these cost models of, you know, where should these be run, and then the portability. So I'm going to talk about the portability first. So you may have heard of VTK, which is it's the de facto standard in essence for doing scientific visualization, and the M is for many core. And so, you know, VTK is a popular standard, everybody knows about it. And so, you know, we chose that name so that it sort of, you know, illustrates the connection to these. And also VTKM is going into VTK. And so tools like ParaView and Visit will have, automatic access to it. It can also be used in micro visualization services, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So ParaView and Visit, they both handle the distributed parallelism, where you break up memory into a bunch of pieces and process it on a large number of nodes. VTKM handles the unknown parallelism. So if you've got a multi-core CPU or a bunch of GPUs, how do you run an isocontouring algorithm on a GPU? So that's the thing that it handles. And so VTKM uses a write once, run everywhere framework. So you could imagine, you've got a bunch of different hardware platforms down at the bottom, and you've got a bunch of algorithms at the top. Implementing each one of these algorithms for a targeted and tuned to each particular piece of hardware would be a nightmare and would be really hard to maintain. So the idea is that these algorithms are implemented in VTKM, and then VTKM has backends which will map the execution onto onto whatever hardware that you're running on. And so so the question is, how well does this strategy work? And so we claim performance portability. And so you can implement your algorithm in VTKM and it will run automatically on a number of parallel devices. So to see how well this worked, in a recent paper, we did a literature review of papers that use VTKM that compared the algorithm implementation to those with an optimized, a hardware optimized implementation. And so this plot summarizes the collected data. And each measurement is represented as a dot showing the speed up of VTKM over the optimized version of the hardware. And so this is the 1.0 line. And so to the left of the line, the hardware optimized is faster, and to the right, VTKM is faster. So as you can see, sometimes VTKM runs faster and sometimes it runs slower. So this table summarizes the data that was collected in this plot. And the most important number is this number in the lower right, which is a geometric mean over all the data. So this shows that on average, VTKM runs with a speed up of 1.14 over hardware specific comparators. Now, when we started the project, we had set a minimum goal of 0.8 speed up for algorithms in VTKM. We felt that being able to implement a single algorithm that runs on all ECP platforms and then some, and incur only a 20% penalty was a good compromise. And so if you were to ask us at the beginning if we could get a factor of 1.0, we would have thought that that was unreasonable without a lot of specialized code. And so having a speed up of 1.14 is better than we would have better than we would have hoped for. So this means that on average, our portable version is faster than the hardware specific implementations we compare against. Now this is counterintuitive and we don't quite understand why this is. But the one conclusion that we can think of is that by using the abstractions, is that we've chosen the right abstractions that make it possible for these algorithms to be implemented efficiently on these these many core devices. Okay, so returning back to the workflow example, one of the other requirements is data access, and Scott talked about ADIOS yesterday. So I'm gonna return to ADIOS a little bit and describe how it's particularly important in a visualization context. So the real power of ADIOS is that it leverages what everybody's already doing. All data producers write data, and all data consumers read data. And so ADIOS provides this abstraction that a producer will write data to disk, and the visualization can read it. It can also, using the exact same API, the simulation can write and the visualization running on the same node can essentially read that data out of memory and work on it. And again, it's the same API, nothing's changed. The producer and the consumer really don't know what's happening. All they know that they're doing is that they're reading and they're writing data, something that they already do. This also works over the system. So you could have the producer running on a set of nodes and the consumer running on a different set of nodes, and the data transferred to, and the data are transferred over the internal network. Again, both of them have no idea what's going on. They're just reading and writing data. And ADIOS also supports moving data over the wide area network to remote systems. So again, it's the same thing. Now, obviously, latency is going to be, you're going to have to worry about latency at this point, but fundamentally, you're using the same API and it's just moving data from one place to the other. And so this is, this is a key piece to, having these services run in a number of different places, and you can access the data, be it from file, from in memory, across the network, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is data interpretation, which we support using this new library that we've been working on called Fides. And so Fides is a data model and schema library that hooks ADIOS and VTK-m together. And so the data model can be, so the data model for a simulation or experiment, you generate a small JSON file that describes, basically describes the semantics of the data that are in the data streams. It can either be in a JSON file or it can be embedded within the ADIOS file and as an attribute that the reader can just read out. And so this provides a way for the points and the connectivity and the fields in the simulation to be written through ADIOS, and Fides provides, it will give you a coordinate system and the cell set and the fields which constitute the VTK-m data set. And this uses zero copy whenever possible, and it also has some advanced data modeling capabilities for some of the codes with really exotic data models, so that they can be mapped efficiently and directly onto VTK-m data sets. So in this way, services can understand what they're getting because there's this schema to describe how to interpret this underlying data. And so, I mentioned earlier, this is a simple JSON file that describes, this is just an unstructured mesh. So, I've got a coordinate system and the points are in this variable called points, and the connectivity are a set of triangles, and they are located actually they're located in the variable called connectivity. I'm sorry, this is how you describe a cell set. It's a triangle, and the variable connectivity has the connectivity of the nodes. So Fides has been included in peer review, and I'm working on one for visit. And so so this means right now peer review can directly read ADIOS formats using this Fides interface. And so peer review is a rich tool with lots of different functionality. It's production, runs at scale, blah 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 blah, and visit is the same thing. So so the benefits of ADIOS for peer review users is, again, it's got native parallel support. It handles single to multiple files. It will run on your laptop. It will run on a supercomputer. It has, it supports time series. It's flexible. It's extensible. There's an API for adding additional operators and readers in it, and it can, and it also, and Dave DeMarle mentioned this a little bit earlier too. It handles the in situ inline functionality as well. Let's see. Okay. All right. So the next thing I wanted to discuss is this notion of cost models, which tells you what are the implications of running a service on a particular set of resources. So the notion of in situ or inline in situ is you've got a simulation, the simulation computes, and then there's some code, either that's been embedded into the simulation, or the simulation calls an API that does the viz, but the viz is running on the same set of resources, so they're all sharing the resources. And so often in inline in situ, while the viz is being done, the simulation has to stop because it has to wait till the viz is done because they're using the same set of resources. So in transit visualization is different. Here there's two sets of resources, so the simulation runs, and then it writes its output over the network to another set of resources where the visualization is running and where it performs the analysis and visualization. So two different ways of looking at two categories of doing this. So a few years ago, we put together a position paper that compared inline versus in transit, and we compared these against a number of metrics to try to determine which one was the best under what circumstances. And one of the most interesting ones that we thought was the scalability. And when we presented that in transit would scale better than inline, we actually got a lot of pushback in the talk when we were presented it. And so we thought that was a good opportunity to prove what it was that we were saying, or prove what it was that we were claiming. And so here's an analogy that we like to use. So inline, you've got lots of stuff, and it's sort of like the LA freeway system where there's a lot of stuff and things can get congested. Whereas in transit, where you've got fewer, beefier, the viz has access to the whole node. So you've got the notion of these race cars, these powerful race cars, and few of them, and this can scale better depending on what you're going to do. So one of the issues, and so the study was looking at the costs, which costs more. Which basically gets at scalability as well. But the metric that we wanted to evaluate was cost. So when does in transit cost less? When does it cost more? And so in transit can cost more when you've got dedicated resources that may sit idle, or when your dedicated resources can't keep up with the simulation, and it essentially blocks the simulation. Well, one option is to block the simulation. The other is to just skip time steps. And then you also have to deal with the cost to transfer the data over the network. So why can it cost less? Well, a key observation is that we have an opportunity to make viz algorithms more efficient. And this is particularly true for algorithms that require a lot of communication. So here's an example on inline. Let's say that we're running a large simulation on 100,000 compute nodes, and an algorithm runs for 2 seconds. Then the cost of that visualization is 200,000 node seconds. But if we can compute the same thing on 500 nodes and it takes 200 seconds, then our cost is halved. It's down to 100,000 node seconds. So the question is, when do these sorts of things happen? Okay, and so so what we're looking at is the amount, the cost saved has to be greater than the transfer cost, the idle costs, and the blocking costs. And so we recently published this was a paper from 2020 where we defined this notion called VCEF, which is the visualization cost efficiency function. And this shows, and this graph here shows when this basically plots this this value for the different runs that we made. So we made a number of different runs, going from 2 to the 3rd cores up to 2 to the 14 rank. It was ranks, yeah. So from 8 ranks up to 2048. And the triangle runs were an isocontour algorithm, and the volume runs were a volume rendering algorithm, which had a fair bit of communication in it. And so because of that communication, you'll notice that there's more opportunities for savings in transit costs when there's a lot of communication, and as the scale gets bigger and as scale grows. Oops, click in the wrong place. Okay, yeah, so let's see. Yeah, so there's a significant distinction between the different workloads, and yeah, volume rendering benefited because it had a lot more communication. So this previous chart was what is the opportunity for savings, and so this is what we actually found. And so that, so we ran the cases where it was possible for in transit to be higher, and these are the cases when the glyphs that are filled in are the ones that actually achieved a cost savings, and the cost factor is right here. So so this particular one had a 2.3. It was 2.3 times less costly to run it in transit than to run it inline. And we've got the equality line here where both of them are the same. And so, of the 50, so in our test, in the cases that we were testing, we identified 58 possible cases where in transit could be cheaper, could cost less. And of those 58, 30 of them actually did achieve savings. And those are, and again, those are the solid glyphs in there. And so, these sorts of things are very critical to understand when you're putting together a workflow, to know what particular algorithm on what type of data, where should you run it? Should you run it inline, or should you allocate additional nodes and run it there? And how many additional nodes do you need? And so these are critical things that feed into our Viz as a service in order to make efficient use of computational resources during a workflow. So, to sort of circle back, Viz and analysis is getting harder and harder. Streaming data, large streaming data, makes everything a lot more complicated. And so what we really need to do is work together in providing these scalable solutions. And one of the things that we emphasize in the Viz as a service is we rely on different communities. Viz people need access to data, but I'm not a data access expert. And so if we can leverage the work being done by the experts on the ADIOS project, then we can get the latest and greatest and optimize data movement for these new architectures, and we can just rely on their technologies and use them in this service based way to make everything work together. And with that, that's the end of my talk.
That's great. Thanks very much, Dave. Very, very interesting. There's one question at the moment in the Q&A. I think you may have actually answered it shortly after it was asked, which is, will Fides be packaged in PowerView? And I think you said it was in there. Is that right?
It is, yeah. It's VTK-m is in both of them. Now, not every operation in the two tools can be run in VTK-m. We're doing them, a little by little, but we're working on the most common one, things like isocontour, thresholding, blah blah, things like that. So it's working in there.
Okay.
So Dave, I think I know who that question may have come from. And it was actually, when will it be in the ParaView binaries? So I think at the moment you have to build ParaView yourself to get it, don't you?
Oh, I see. Okay. Dave might know that. I'm not. Yeah, I know that Viz. I'm more involved with Visit. I know with Visit, it's an option that you can build. I think the binaries are built with it. The pair view, I'm not quite sure. I don't know the details of that, but I can ask that question and encourage. I know the kitware guys well, and we can. I know that they want to do that as soon as they can, if it isn't already.
Yeah, I think that'd be great, because I know a few people are very keen to work with it, but for them to reach out to the wider community, it's helpful if it's in the binaries rather than asking people to rebuild ParaView.
Right. Yeah. That's always a challenge. It's a big package to build.
Dave, I had a question about the in-transit visualization. I guess it's something I hadn't really thought about before. So do people move the whole simulation onto the viz nodes, or do they move part of it, or bits they might want to viz, or how's it typically used?
Well, it's a little bit of each. It's all of the above. Sometimes it's just the parts of the data that you want to look at. One of the things that fits in really well with what was being discussed yesterday with MGuard is that if you can compress it so that all you're doing is moving the information to a certain error tolerance, as opposed to all the data, which can be really large, then then you're moving much less data, and so things can because transfer cost is one of the things that you have to keep in mind. And then also you need to have enough memory on the in-transit resources so that you can do what you want to do. Now that can be a win in transit because you've got all the memory. You're not sharing it with the simulation, and so you've got some options that way. And so there's a number of different things to think about, and there's no right way to do it. It really depends on what you want to do. Kind of the one heuristic is, if it's an embarrassingly parallel algorithm, you might as well just do it in line. But if you got something that's communication, has a lot of communication, then in transit can be a huge win. The other nice thing about in transit is that if you're running something in line and your viz has a bug in it, you take the whole simulation down, right? Or you can take the whole simulation down. In transit can be done much more asynchronous. In fact, when we were running one of these workflows with the Fusion group, there was a memory leak in my viz code, and so it ran testing, it ran fine, it ran fine for an hour, but then when we ran it for 2 and 3 hours, it crashed. But since it was being run in transit asynchronously, the viz crashed, but the viz just kept on, the simulation just kept on running. And so I scrambled, figured out what was going on, fixed my bug, relaunched the viz service in transit, and it just picked up where it was before. And we missed 20 minutes of simulation output, but the simulation kept going. So
got it. Yeah. Okay, that's nice.